Welcome to Meet the Kalakars. This is Bhavani. I'm very excited. It's my first time moderating, and I am so excited to introduce these two guests to you. And we have an amazing conversation ahead of us. There we go. As I said, I knew a couple more people rolling in. Okay. You know what? It's 5:01. Let's be on American Standard Timing and get it going. Meet the Kalakars. There we go. Let me introduce you to our two amazing guests, Shrihari Sathe. Am I saying that right?
Sathe, yeah.
Sathe. See, I knew I was going to get it wrong. He is a producer and a director. 34th Independent Spirit Award winner, Producers Award 2019, Best Film, Silver Peacock Award for 1,000 rupee note, Independent Spirit John Cassavetes Award, It Felt Like Love, which, by the way, stunning and gorgeous and such a beautiful representation of youth. And 2013, Sundance Institute Creative Producing Fellow. Welcome, Shrihari.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Next up, we have Simon Taufique.
Taufique.
No,
Yeah.
Taufique.
Close.
Okay.
Enough.
Thank you guys for being so kind. I am just the worst with names. But he is a producer-composer, which is wonderful and new to us. He is the producer of The Interpreters, founding, this is my life. When you have dyslexia, this is what happens. Founding partner for the Film Fun Atomic Features, which we're going to talk about, and I'm very excited about this. Teaches Introduction to Producing Film and TV at NYUSPS, Tribeca Film Festival Programming Committee. Welcome, Simon.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So, you know what? I'm going to just jump in, guys. Both of you have films that really talk about the human condition. And this is really an honor for me to talk to you because I absolutely love films in which you not only experience what the character is experiencing, but you experience the world they have to live in. Let's start with you, Shrihari, and talk about Requiem for a Dream. In that movie, you are in such the angst of this young woman, but you really go further and you take us through the whole journey. What led you to find yourself into this kind of filmmaking?
I miscorrect the title. It's The Sweet Requiem.
Sweet Requiem. I apologize. Yes.
Requiem for a Dream is a very, very different movie.
No. The Sweet Requiem. My apology. Let me just pull up my notes. Go ahead.
Yeah. The Sweet Requiem, so the film, maybe some of you have seen it, it's a Tibetan language film that released at the IFC Center last year in July, so about a year ago. The film is entirely in Tibetan language and was directed by a husband-wife team who have been working together for over 30 years. In the team, Ritu Sarin is writer, director, producer of Indian origin, and Tenzing Sonam, her husband, is a writer and director of Tibetan heritage. So they've been working together as a team, I think, since the early 80s, primarily focusing on the Tibetan struggle and stories that are connected with the Tibetan diaspora across the world. So with the Sweet Requiem, one of the things that we wanted to explore in the film was the idea of displacement and the idea of wanting to belong to a new home, at the same time having haunting memories of your past and the home that you escaped or home that you had to leave behind. So the film was shot in the Indian Himalayas in Ladakh, and it was shot in Delhi. The film is set in Tibet and in Delhi, but we couldn't film in Tibet because there was no way for Tenzing, who is a Tibetan living in exile, to go back to Tibet to film anything. So we filmed the Tibetan portions in the Indian Himalayas, and then Delhi stood for Delhi itself. The genesis of that story actually came from an incident that happened at a pass known as a Nangpala Pass, where a group of young nuns were shot at by the Chinese border police. And this was for the first time that this was captured on video. A Romanian mountain climber actually filmed this entire incident and had posted this on social media outlets. And Tenzing had seen this and was really moved by someone's desire to want to seek a better life or to want to escape oppression of some kind. So Ritu and Tenzing both live in Dharamsala, which is one of the largest Tibetan exile communities in the world. And in their daily life, they were seeing a lot of young children who were 10, 12 years old, who had kind of made this treacherous journey. And Tenzing really wanted to tell the story about what happens to these children once they grow up. And that's kind of where the genesis of the story kind of came through, was understanding the sense of closure that the character Dolkar in our film seeks throughout the narrative of the film.
Srihari, what led you to look for material like this? I mean, it's because a lot of your career and your, your films have this depth as well as Simon's, and we'll talk to Simon about it. But what led you to this particular place?
I mean, my work, a lot of the films that I produce are about marginalized communities and about people who are marginalized in one way or the other. It doesn't necessarily have to be a social issue film per se, but I'm always interested in telling stories of giving voices to people who don't have voices, who are stifled by one form or the other. In this case, it was being stifled by Chinese oppression, being stifled by wealthy governments who are cawing to demands by Chinese ambassadors or governments. So that was something that was interesting for me, was to tell a story of a young woman whose heritage is in danger in some way of being wiped out completely. And for me, that was very interesting. The idea that it is Tibetan was always interesting because I grew up in India, and as a young teenager and a young boy growing up in Mumbai, I didn't know anything about this, So as an adult, I wanted to make a film that kind of shone a light on this large community that has been living in India since the late 40s, early 50s, late 40s. And it was just my way of sort of making a film that could speak to their plight in some ways.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Simon, in The Weight of Gold, you address something that most of us don't think about, the after of the Olympics, what happens after the gold. You also, all your work also has that depth of seeing other people. And you were also the composer, which was amazing because you brought not only your filmmaking and your love of subject, but your love of music to weigh into that movie. So tell us what inspires you to find these kind of subject matters, and especially with The Weight of Gold, what sparked that, want to show that perspective?
I think I'm drawn to those stories that offer some surprise. And that's certainly what I find in Shri's work. I'm very inspired by the stories that he tells, because you think you're going in for one thing, and then the whole world opens up and you're surprised by what you've learned. And I like that it's not, you're not going in for a history lesson, you're going in to discover these characters, and through their story, you learn about their history. And those are the kind of filmmakers that I'm drawn to, and those kinds of stories. So with Weight of Gold, it certainly is in line with that. We go in thinking that this is about these superhuman beings that we call Olympic athletes, and then find out that they're human and that they have these the same struggles and that we experience. And when we started working on this film, at least from my side of things in post, we thought it was one thing. We thought it was just about the challenges of living in the shadow of the Olympics, when that that big event that you've been hoping for. In this case, it's the Olympics, but it could be you graduating from college, you get married, you get the big job, you get the big promotion, and you think that's going to set you up and guide you on your path. And then when you realize that goal, you realize that not enough has changed. Hardly anything has changed in how you feel. Everything else in the world is the same, and you expected that everything would be different. And that, when you see people who have realized a lifelong goal, something that they've trained since they were children, and you realize what the sacrifice entailed, you see from the outset as outsiders that this is going to end with some sort of an awakening, that they're going to realize that there has to be a life after this, and no one has prepared them for that. And being sheltered from the rest of the world, they don't have the tools, they don't have the resources or the support to enter the rest of the world. And luckily for most of us, we've had that. But imagine being put into a lab and being told you're not going to be able to get out until you've reached the goal. So that was a surprise for me. And then the other surprise was the pandemic and working on this project of people who undergo this constant stress, this constant tension of thinking they're going to fail at this event that's meant to change their lives. And then also the stress of trying to grapple with what comes after. And I realized while working on this, locked away in my own lab, my home away from home, my studio, during the pandemic, realizing I'm experiencing that same stress level. I'm experiencing that fear of what comes after this global event that has everyone gripped, and no one knows the outcome, when it's going to be or what it's going to look like when it's all over.
Or when we're getting out.
Yeah, so I was living a parallel existence to these characters, and that was part of the surprise, is that I want to go into projects where the story is captivating to me and it's exciting, but I also want to be able to peel away the layers and find out something about that experience by the end of the process that I didn't know going in. And you can't predict whether or not a story or a filmmaker or a subject is going to do that for you, but you do get that instinct after a while that there's more here than meets the eye. And your job as an artist, as someone who is innately curious, to pick those subjects where asking the questions will reveal those things. Adding your artistry will start to reveal those things. And being able to highlight and support some of those layers makes them more obvious or more visible in the story making process. So when you do watch it, people point out things to you about what they just saw that are surprising to you, and it's because your intention was to put a spotlight on some of those areas, but you didn't know what was going to be revealed, and that's the other part of the surprise.
Now, here's my follow-up question to that. You are the composer of this. So you started out thinking it was going to be one thing. You quickly realized in post it's something else. How did you pivot with that as a composer?
Well, as a composer, I really like I like to write music that is really edgy and dark, and you just want to slit your wrists when you hear my music. That's the goal. But it wasn't that easy on this one, because even though we're talking about people who are depressed and who have high rates of suicidality,
Yeah.
It wasn't going to be that easy. Like I can't just score someone's suicide, and that would have been very right up my alley. It's for better or worse. And so the challenge here was we have to offer some hope. We're in a really scary time. And when we started on this project, it wasn't scary. So we could scare the bejesus out of people and it was okay, but now it's not. Now you have to offer a nuanced take on this very difficult subject, because people are experiencing this in their real lives. So the responsibility, the the chance that you might be triggering someone's own dark corner and dark reaction is very real. So it was with that sensitivity to say this is music that has to not only highlight the depth of their struggle, but also the hint that they have the reserves to find their way out. And so that was a real challenge, because it means your music has to be complex. As a storyteller, you have to offer more than just one shade. It's got to have a gradient in it. It's got to have layering to it. And that's the other part of what I look for in projects, where you're scared a little bit of whether or not you're going to fail. And that fear can drive you to learn more and push harder and become better.
Beautiful. Thank you, Simon. Now, talking about pandemics and being stuck in rooms and all that other stuff, Srihari, you were about to be in production and then COVID. So tell us about what's happening right now.
Yeah, so I got lucky and unlucky in some ways. I was supposed to originally shoot a film in March in upstate New York. And I got lucky in the sense that our actress ended up dropping out of the film in end of January. So we were about six and a half weeks away from start of principal photography when the actress decided she didn't want to do the movie anymore. And when that happened, we were like, okay, I guess we got to push the shoot because we don't have anyone to shoot with. So we pushed the shoot to May, and COVID happened. So I got lucky in the sense that I was not in the middle of production and got shut down. So that, in that sense, it was really great. But what ended up happening was something that a lot of people felt would only last a couple of weeks. Now we are going into month 6 almost of the pandemic. So shoots have continued to gotten pushed. At one point I was supposed to shoot the film in July, then it was in August. And then finally Screen Actors Guild and a bunch of the other unions kind of came out with their guidelines. So my producing partner and I were working through creating our own set of guidelines for making an independent film in the current climate. So we drafted our risk management protocols. We had a bunch of calls with SAG, talked to a few other unions, and we were supposed to start filming the movie in Georgia in September. And as of last week, the studio decided not to release 2 out of my 3 lead actors, which means that you can't shoot a movie without any actors. So we actually had to push the film to next spring because the studios wouldn't release any major TV shows before the end of the year, even though they themselves are not certain when they will make anything.
Srihari, so can you walk us through a little bit as a producer? So what was the conversation like with SAG? Because you had it much earlier than SAG even sent out the rules, it sounds like. You know, you've been having conversations trying to get them on the same plate. What are the restrictions? Like, what are they looking for? Just to break it down for anyone else who might be looking to produce. It's within COVID.
Yeah, I mean, basically their main mandate, their cornerstone is testing. They're asking for PCR testing 3 times a week. There were productions that said that SAG seemed to be flexible, but on our call with them, they made it very clear that they needed 3 times a week testing, PCR testing, not an antibody test or not a rapid test, which in the current climate—
Just tell everybody what a PCR test is in case they don't
know. It's a molecular test, basically, which is a deep nasal swab or a deep throat swab.
Wow.
And it's extremely uncomfortable. I did get one recently in July. And just that one time was fairly uncomfortable. So when I heard that they're asking for 3 times a week, I was like, okay, that's going to be hard. But the bigger challenge is it's not the test itself as much, it's the turnaround time. Most labs in the US are so backed up right now that the average turnaround time to get results from these tests is 5 to 7 days. So if you're doing testing 3 times a week on a shoot that's going to be 5 or 6 weeks, if you're not getting your results quickly, it defeats the purpose of testing because you're if someone is infected on your crew or your cast, you are in effect spreading the virus amongst your cast and crew, and also to the locality that you're filming in. So it's starting to get pretty hard to actually get
And what
any
are the
production
costs?
off the ground.
For now, do you incur the cost? How does the cost work?
You incur, as producers, you incur the cost. And just to give you a ballpark, it was adding close to 8.5 to 10% of my entire budget,
Wow.
just for testing and COVID-related sanitation and risk management and health and safety protocol expenses. So that's a huge number.
No, that's a huge number, but and what about insurance? What were the
Well, insurance doesn't. Yeah, insurance as of now is not covering any COVID-related work stoppage,
Okay.
or is not covering any COVID-related cast or crew illness. So, which means basically you as producers are taking a huge risk.
Wow.
As to going into production. The Screen Actors Guild has categorically told all their members to not sign any liability waivers. I'm sure there's a bunch of articles people might have read about that. Some unions are also telling their members to not sign something like that. Workers' comp is going in two different ways. They're saying that they might cover work stoppage or fees for someone who gets COVID at a workplace, but you have to be able to prove it. So the proving it part becomes the harder part. How do you prove someone got COVID on your film set? So, I mean, that's a variable because I haven't personally shot anything since the pandemic started. But my film in September was going to be my first kind of production to go down that route. I mean, it was a fairly large production. We had over 125 speaking parts. We were shooting for 22 days total. Lots of locations. So we had somehow managed to figure out a way to mitigate the risk as much as we could as an independent film without having to quarantining everyone on our cast and crew for 2 weeks prior to start. But just the costs were too high, and we were able to figure out a way to make it work within the budget we had and raise additional money to do it. But when you don't have any talent, you can't make the movie. So we just had to take the call instead of continuing to push a week at a time, just saying, hey, we are going to push the shoot to next year because it just didn't make sense to try to recast, because that process would have taken much longer than trying to do the film next year.
And you're also holding on to people from your staff as you were trying to push, correct?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things was I sort of had to give an ultimatum to my actors reps saying, hey, I need a yes or no answer by Friday.
Right.
If you cannot give me a yes answer, just give me a no answer. That's fine too. You know, I just want to know. So that way everyone can move on and try to get other work done, try to get some other paying work so that they can support their families. But just constantly pushing just didn't make sense for anyone on the team.
Not at all. Thank you. Simon, how has COVID affected you and the work you're doing right now?
Sure. Well, it's interesting. I've been pretty swamped because there were a lot of projects in post. So my composing work was pretty nonstop between Weight of Gold, and then I did a film for Kevin Smith, and then a film that I produced that we shot last summer and was now ready for post. So in the span of COVID, I've been able to score 3 films, and so that was pretty busy. So it was lucky timing to be locked down and working on films that were at that phase of development. But on the other side, on the production side, it's been a time of great development because now you're indoors and you don't have distractions and you can focus on developing new projects. So and getting scripts read because actors aren't in production either. So I've been able to get some productions. And just yesterday we attached a name actress to a comedy that of course I'm going to be pitching to Shri soon enough. And not quite the depths of a Tibetan story, but something fun and. But at the same time, I'm involved I'm a founding partner of a soundstage and media campus venture, and it's something that we are developing in multiple locations around the country. They're basically sound stages and production offices and post-production labs, all put together as one facility, as a media campus. And they're meant to be these hubs of creative activity, multidisciplinary, lots of great inspiration, lots of great companies. So we've been corralling a lot of really big brands, some of the biggest names in the movie and music business. And so that's been exciting. And what we've found is that shooting on sound stages is now more in demand than ever because of COVID. It was in high demand anyway, but now that you need a controlled space where you can isolate and not have to worry about, originally, you just, you lock down a street corner if you're shooting on a city street. Right. Now you have to lock down the entire, another block because you can't have external exposure if someone decides that they're not going to stop as they're walking past your set on the way home. So those kinds of factors have now led to studios and networks pushing even harder for having contained spaces that exist within sound stages or backlots.
So do you think the future of post-COVID production really is sound stages?
Not entirely, but I think the ratio is going to shift. I think there's the idea that you fake a location is going to be more and more likely, because if you thought you were going to shoot in LA and then there's a surge in virus and viral numbers, you can't do that anymore, and you've got to have a backup, and that backup's going to be green screened and on a stage, or you're going to change the script so that you're indoors, which again was going to require a stage, because if you in the past I could rent a location, an apartment or a building or whatever, but now you've got all that mitigation to take place. You have to sanitize, you disinfect, all of that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And that's not going to be cheap or easy. And something's going to slip through the cracks, and you're going to have a crew or an actor get sick, and they could point their fingers at, well, we were at that location and it wasn't cleaned properly, or and there is going to be that need to quarantine. One of my producers on another project, she's on a bigger budget thing. They're shooting in the Dominican Republic on a stage, and everybody, the actors and the crew, are all being quarantined for the entire length of the production. Crew are being housed separately. Cast is being cast separately. There's very little overlap between the two. It's a very strict workflow and process, and it centers around being in that kind of an environment. So the silver lining for me, and certainly unintended, is that this operation, this venture that I got involved in about 2 years ago, that is now getting closer to fruition, is actually more needed now than ever. And so we are in the phase now where we're bringing on equity partners and all of that exciting stuff, but also should we get designated for this particular site that we're looking at in Brooklyn, we'll get into the final design phase. And what's interesting is that if we had been approved 6 months ago, we would not have included something like an isolation section or a testing section. And now we need to do that. So it's a very rapidly moving target. And we know that even with vaccines, it's like a flu shot. And regardless of getting the flu shot, some people will still get the flu, and it's going to shift every year, and you're going to miss some people, and some people won't decide to get vaccinated. And then so it's that, I think, points to the fact that it's going to be a moving target. We're going to miss something, and we need a solution that's going to offer productions the stability and the reliability that I need to be able to shoot. I mean, as producers, part of our job is to be the adult in the room and to make sure that the creatives get to play in the sandbox, while we make sure that none of that sand gets out of the sandbox and contaminates the rest of the playground. So that has become so much harder, but it's become that much more obligatory to us as producers to do that. So I'm looking at sound stages as part of that solution.
No, it's a great idea. Thank you for that, Simon. You touched upon international production, so I'm going to throw to Srihari because Srihari, your entire career has been international productions, which is it's not a commonplace thing. You've shot everywhere, and your IMDb screams, "I've traveled," and I love that. But it's these phenomenal movies from all over the world. Talk to us about the space you live in, because it's a very, and especially as a producer, it's hard enough to do something where you live. You've done things all over the world. And then the second part to that is, how is the international production with COVID? So let's address the first part.
Yeah, I mean, the films that I've made, I really go where the stories take me. So for me, a lot of times when I'm looking at projects, it's not with a particular location in mind. It's more about the content and the director's vision and the underlying screenplay, of course. So there was a film, just to give you an example. I produced a film in the West Bank in Palestine a couple of years ago, and I was pitching this movie in LA in 2013, and there were a few financiers who were interested in coming on board the film, but they asked me, hey, can you move this Arabic language very specific to Palestine film to the US-Mexico border? And I'm like, no, I can't, because that's a different movie. That's not what I'm trying to make. So I've faced a fair amount of resistance in the US, particularly for films that are not in the English language. But I've also been able to find champions along the way. Simon knows this about me. For about a period of 5 to 6 years, I was a nomad. So I didn't have an apartment, and
Wow.
I literally traveled the world from market to festivals to my film sets. And I would only sublet an apartment every time I came back to New York. And that really allowed me to kind of broaden my network, both creative as well as from a financing and producing side, to really gather a group of like-minded individuals to work in the same space that I was working in. And I think that has in some ways shaped my career in terms of the kind of content that I got interested in and the kind of films I made. I mean, just to give you, to add to the second question that you mentioned, so in my latest production that's in post-production right now is a 4-country production that was filmed in New York, in Sydney, in Mumbai, and in Lucknow in India.
Wow.
And we literally finished the last part of the shoot, which was filmed in Mumbai at the end of February, just before India, like wow. 2 weeks before India went on lockdown. So we were really, really fortunate in that sense that we were able to wrap it up, because if that film was in the middle of production during COVID, it would be done in the water. There's no way I would be able to raise the same amount of money to redo the film or shoot the remaining half, just given the tight resources that we were working with. I mean, this film, we had a lot of challenges, because one of the things that happened was my director is from Bangladesh. The DP was supposed to be from Bangladesh. The actor is from India. And I'm producing in the US as well as coordinating for the other countries. Right. Our DP's visa got approved, but his passport never came back from the US consulate in Dhaka. So on the first day, I'm on set with my team, and our DP is not able to arrive. So the DP is lighting the film via video WhatsApp with his first ACN gaffer to keep the production going.
Wow.
So we're still, first day's gone by, we figured it out. Second day, we had to do the same thing. Still, his passport is not being returned. And the visa was approved, so we have no idea why they were just holding on to his passport. So ultimately, the film, we had to elevate the first AC to be the cinematographer. So he shot half of the movie, and then the DP from Bangladesh shot the second half, which was in India and Australia. But these are kind of the challenges in international production, is that you really have to be able to pivot on the dime, because you don't know what's going to come your way. Even though you have done all the necessary steps in order to be able to make the film. So it's just the challenges increase manifold when you have multiple citizens, multiple countries and territories involved. Independent filmmaking by default is hard, but I think if the only way to get through this is if your cast and crew are really willing to support the project and be in the same boat as you. Because even if one person from my cast and crew had said, I can't deal with this, we would have been in a hard place, you know? So
Right.
I think just having the community around you is very important.
No, that's amazing. And now let's talk about, I mean, and then let's just get into how has it been right now that you're setting up, you know, you set up different projects as a producer. You're always like, how has it been with other countries dealing with COVID and their restrictions and standards and what they're looking for? Ultimately, like we know what the US is doing through SAG. I know some of my South Indian production, soap productions are back up again.
Mm-hmm.
Now my question is, like, what is it in every country that you've been so far like talking to and dealing with?
Well, Australia, I know, has been in production for a while. UK, France as well. One of the main differences that happened in the last few months compared to the US, especially in France and the UK, was that the government put an insurance backstop, which meant that any film that got shut down during COVID, the government told the insurance agencies, we will cover these costs for those films. So the insurance agencies were comfortable
Awesome.
giving coverage, whereas in the US that hasn't happened. Something similar happened right after 9/11, which was a terrorism rider. So there is a bill in Congress right now for such a backstop from the government for COVID-related work stoppage. But this bill can take anywhere between 6 to 11 months at the earliest to pass, which means most independent producers and productions are going to have to take the risk, or their financiers are going to have to take the risk. The big studios, they almost have unlimited wealth, so they can be their own insurance companies if something, which us as independent producers, we don't really have it. So the risk is quite high, and everyone has to be on the same page if you do want to go into production, that sure, if your work does get stopped, you're going to have to raise more money, or you have to have a big enough contingency to be able to pick up your shoot again and continue filming right after. India, I know they're shooting a fair amount of commercials, like they're smaller shoots, but full-fledged Bollywood movies, as far as I know, are not into production yet, and nor are the big TV shows. So there is a need for content, but India's lockdown is way more severe than it is in the US. And it continues to be. I'm trying to set up a project in Chile for the end of the year. They are just starting to pick up small commercials and shorts as well, but no feature film, as far as I know, is in production down there. So I think the main thing is, for any international production, you really have to navigate the protocols of the country that you're going to film in, but also from where people are coming. So just imagine if you're filming in some other country and your cast and crew were coming from different parts of the world, with all the travel restrictions in place right now, I don't think you can make a movie. It's next to impossible because no one will be able to fly. So casting is going to be a big problem. I know a lot of reps and managers and lawyers are asking their talent not to fly, even though talent wants to fly. But now, who bears the risk? Do you, as a producer, bear the risk the moment the actor leaves their home? Are you willing to do that when you don't have no control? Probably not, you know? So it's going to be pretty hard for bigger budget productions in the independent space to get off the ground. I feel like a lot of people now are going to be targeting very small DIY, like under 10-person cast and crew kind of shoots, or films that are taking place in one location. And that's kind of the prime time for those kind of films right now. So in some ways, very independent voices are actually going to be able to make content compared to the higher budget independents.
Thank you. Guys, I'm going to ask you to line up your questions. So go ahead and put that in the chat. We got a couple more questions. I got two more questions, and then I'm going to open it up because we want you guys to be able to ask your questions. Simon, I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to smush a bunch of them together. First and foremost, congratulations on your Emmy nomination.
Thank
Uh,
you. Thank you very much.
it is a beautiful movie, and I think people are just going to. I want you to talk about interpreters. First, start with that, but I do want to. I want you to talk about how your music informs your filmmaking, and your filmmaking informs your film. But last but not least, I really do want you to talk about your film funds. But I will
Sure.
remind you about that at the end because I want you to kind of really break down what is it that excites you about a project, and you in specific. I think you do a beautiful job of looking at what interests you and how you break it down. I want you to talk about that, but I will let you answer them at your leisure.
Sure. Well, to talk about the interpreters, and thank you for those kind words. Yeah, I get involved in projects that, not unlike Shri, it's you're driven by what the director's vision and passion is. That's what dictates so much of what needs to be there, and what dictates your role. So when Sufjan Khan, one of the directors, when he brought that film to my attention, we had been working together on a bunch of smaller projects. I met Shri, not, I'm sorry, Shri, I met Sufjan at the South Asian International Film Festival. I was the program director that year, and he had been the cinematographer on Ramchand Pakistani, a beautiful film, and also had a short that he directed. And so I got to talking to him, and we struck up a friendship, and then just stayed connected. And he would share projects that he was doing, and then when the time was right, we started working together. And it was after I produced Imperium, literally like the week after I got back to New York. We sat down for coffee to catch up, and he told me about this project. And he's one of these guys who he got his own equipment in order to chase down those stories that he felt passionate about. And so his co-director, Andres Caballero, he was a StoryCorps producer as well, and they had done a story about an Iraqi translator who was inseparable from his American counterpart. And so the Iraqi translator is a Muslim, he's Iraqi, and the American is a National Guardsman from Minnesota, Trump supporter. You wouldn't think that these two guys would be friends, and yet they became like brothers. And so when it became obvious that that special visa that all translators are granted when they do this dangerous work to help the US troops and coalition forces in Iraq and Afghanistan, when that wasn't forthcoming, you saw this brotherhood rise to the occasion and try to get these men and their families out of harm's way. And so Sufjan wanted to tell the story, and he was willing to go to these battlegrounds and shoot the footage and interview these people and their families and document this experience. And so when he told me about that, I said, just you tell me what I can do to help. I just got off this wonderful film about a very social impact subject. Imperium was about white supremacy, a fiction film based on a memoir, but it was in 2016. And at the time, it was right before the election, and people weren't convinced that this was a real thing back then. So, and so I'd come from that into something else, and I thought, yeah, I want to help tell stories that can change the way people look at things. And so this seemed like the perfect avenue for it. So I initially thought I would just help on the music side, and that's to answer your other question of how do I smush those two things together. I usually get started as the composer on a project, and when I see a willingness and an opportunity for help, when I can help improve things, and I'm not stepping on somebody's toes, when there's a need that needs to be fulfilled, then I could step in. And I have that background as a former startup founder. So having run a company before I got into music, before I got into film, I know how to stick my nose in and try to get stuff done and sniff out where there's room for growth. And I know that sounds gross, but it
No,
actually
not at
turns
all.
out okay. And so, yeah, for those films where that's worked out, those filmmakers have come back and said, yeah, can we do that again? And can you produce? Can you help bring money? Can you help bring talent and those kinds of things? And so, yeah, I have to do some juggling, like I did on Interpreters, to be producer at one stage of the process, and then step into the creative side and be the composer, and then back and forth, depending. Like on Interpreters, it was that process of bringing in financiers during post while I'm working on the music, or suggesting editors when we realized that we needed to go back in to the cut after our editor had timed out. And so things like that, where you're thinking, what else can I do to help, and not feeling like you're bound by your role. Like, I'm only supposed to do this, so that's all I'm going to do. When you have the producer hat on, it kind of gives you that liberty to say, I'll do whatever it takes.
Right.
And being a late bloomer as a composer, I didn't study music. I came to this far later in life than most composers do these days. I also didn't understand those rules either. So it was like, well, if this film needs help to get promoted, if this film needs a publicist, they need an entertainment attorney, if they need a distributor, I'm going to help them get that, even if I'm just a composer, because if nobody gets to see it, nobody gets to hear my work.
Correct.
So it's a 360 thing, a circle of life thing. So, and that's how I got involved in the film fund, is that if I'm working with filmmakers and they give me their script and they say, here's the script for my next film, I'd love you to do the music. And I say, okay, great. When do we start? Oh, well, once we raise the money and then cast it and then shoot it and then on and on and on, then you'll get your chance at the a bite at the apple. And so, having raised money before, not for film, but for in a startup world, I knew how to do that. And so that led me to some interesting sources of money. And it led to the idea of, well, why not, if you're going to do this, have to go through this process every time you make a film, why not do it once for more than one film? And so a fund financing or sourcing money for multiple films or a slate of films made a whole lot more sense. So I got involved in a couple of these, and it's been a learning process, and it's interesting that now in the working with the city and working with, it's staggering the amount of money that's out there.
Yeah.
When you tap into real estate, you tap into the tech world. We've raised almost $100 million for this soundstage facility, and it's staggering to know that that's the tip of the iceberg, because it's real estate. But the only reason they're interested in this real estate is because it's entertainment, because it's film. And so that clues you into the fact that there's a ton of money out there of people who want in on entertainment, who want in on filmmaking, if it's through the right source, if it's under the right conditions, if you have the right in. And somehow, some way, the in that we've gotten for this part of the venture has been real estate and the arts. And we have some advisors on our team who are very prominent in the arts world, and their boards are filled with billionaires and philanthropists with tons of money, and they are really interested in giving back. But they are very careful and very hard-nosed about where their money will make the biggest impact. And so it's a good learning lesson. So So it's been an exciting process, and it's feeding back into the film fund idea, because if you own the means of production, which is having a campus where these things can be made, then you can have a seat at the table of deciding which projects get made, and having those people who are funding this part of the process fund another part of the process, whether it's to fund and back social impact stories, or those kinds of projects which highlight equity, representation, inclusivity, all of those things that matter to us as filmmakers of color. And look, I know how difficult it is to get money out of even those who are within our community who've done well. It has to make business sense. But at the same time, if they wanted to just make money, they just continue to do what they're doing.
Yes.
They've already figured out how to make money. What our job is to help them justify spending money, because they may not necessarily care about making a profit, but they want to make sure that this money profits in some other way.
Yeah.
And so that's really interesting. And they want to see that you have the confidence in these stories. So you've really got to know why this story and not the other one. Why is this project worth financing in a 360 manner, which is it makes business sense. It's got a story that makes sense. There's a craft, an artistic component to this, on and on and on. I mean, you really have to have a mastery of why this is going to make sense to someone who may not know anything about how these things are put together,
Absolutely.
but is no less insightful into the process.
Okay, I'm gonna ask both of you, would you mind staying on for a couple of more minutes, because we've got some great questions, but or do you have a hard out at 6 o'clock?
I'm
I
good.
can stay for a bit. Yeah.
Okay, thank you guys. Okay, before we open up to questions, Simon, the last question is, so you've talked to us about getting the film financing, okay, on that end, the film funds. When a project comes to you, what is your process of going, okay, this is something that we're gonna take, this is something we're not gonna take?
It really depends on where we see the market. And I'll say that with the caveat that the film fund that I was working with Atomic, that's certainly hit a pause. But the criteria that we were looking at was really it was films made by and for filmmakers. So it really had to highlight the filmmaking and the craft component of it. But with the sense that you didn't need a film degree to enjoy it or to appreciate it.
Okay.
And that's what I think, looking at a film company like A24 is really instructive, in that all of their films, from my perspective, have an artistry to them. They are challenging in some way. They're doing something new or novel. And at the same time, it's more than just indie film geeks who are watching them. Normal people enjoy their films, and yet they do appreciate the fact that they're trying to do something different. But it has become almost like a brand. And you can get a sense of, what you're getting into when you see that logo at the front of the screen. And so I do take inspiration from those kinds of efforts, because I go based on not just looking at a project, and I think I could speak for Shri on this level, on at some level, you've got to enjoy. It's got to be something that you would enjoy seeing yourself.
Yeah.
And so it has to appeal to your taste. And taste is something that can't really be learned. It's something that you pick up along the way through your life experience and your taste in other things.
Thank you so much, Simon.
Totally.
Guys, go ahead, Sri.
No, I was just gonna say I agree with everything you said.
All righty, I'm going to open it up to questions. The first question comes from Neeraj. When we ask you to put on your camera and unmute yourself, please come and ask the question, Neeraj.
Hey guys, how's it going? Thanks so much.
Hi.
I just had a more I guess a bit of a general question. I've over the years, so I'm a DP, and I've heard a lot about, kind of after a certain point, the way forward is, eventually at some point getting an agent and all of that. But I mean, up until that point, I was just wondering, because I come from a narrative background, what's the best way you think to get in front of producers that are kind of creating projects at this point in time with COVID, with like festivals kind of being out of the question and a lot of that kind of stuff? Is there a way that you should be approaching kind of meeting new people and networking at this point in time?
I feel like panels like this is a good way to start
Right.
meeting people. But I guess the other thing is contacting the other producers that you've already worked with, or the directors, or even in some cases, the production designer on the last 2-3 films you did, just asking them what else they're working on, or if they are willing to introduce you to some producers that they worked with. So I feel like not just during this time, but any time, kind of the spider web strategy works best if you are trying to branch out of your existing network, asking 2 or 3 contacts that to introduce you to 2 or 3 other people,
Right.
and your work. One of the things that I always do when introducing someone is I adopt the double opt-in strategy, which is I ask the person, let's say Neeraj wants me to introduce him to Simon. I ask Simon, hey, Simon, are you okay if I introduce Neeraj to you? He is a DP and he would like to talk to you about some projects that you might have. If Simon says, no, I'm all full, I already have all the DPs for my projects, I'm not looking at anyone right now, then I have to politely get back to Neeraj and say, hey, Simon's too busy right now, but maybe we can check in with him again at a later time. Because if I go ahead and introduce Simon and Neeraj when Simon is really not interested or doesn't have the time, it doesn't make any sense for either party, because they're not really going to achieve something out of that interaction or that meeting. So that's something that I've always followed, is I always ask the person who is going to be introduced if they have the time to talk to the person.
Awesome.
And to just piggyback off of what Shri just said, I tell my students, you've got to treat networking as part of your job. And my students being producers. So, and I always get groans when I hear that, because networking has a negative connotation. And part of that homework is go to at least or participate in some networking function once a week, at least, because it's part of your job. And that's where you get to meet people like Shri. And then you have to do what Shri is saying. Not only are you going to benefit when he introduces you to someone, but you have to take it upon yourself to introduce him to somebody else. So that spiderweb works both ways. And it's also important to make sure that it's not just a flat and dispassionate networking. People will, so if Shri was to introduce you to me, yes, I've got to have that availability and that need for somebody. But if he were to say, this is a great guy, you guys got to meet. He's this is a guy who's is going to set the world on fire, or at least, he's got great taste in whatever. That's going to make me more interested in meeting you as a person. And you've got to connect with people as real people, not just as a conduit or as a stepping stone to someone else. The people, there's that saying, the people that you meet on the way up are the same people you're going to meet on the way down.
Yeah.
And so we've got to help each other get to a better place. Not that what we're doing now is not great. It's just, you want to do more of that. And, the way I met Shri was my mentor introduced Shri to me. And even though we didn't get a chance to work together on the project that we met for, we became fast friends. And the prospect of working together is just a no-brainer. It would be an amazing thing. And we have introduced each other to other great filmmakers and other great people. So it's got to be an organic and genuine process.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just give you a quick example. Since you're a cinematographer, I met a cinematographer at a party at Sundance in 2013. One night, we spoke for maybe an hour total during this time, and we exchanged contact info, and then both of us went our separate ways. We would maybe see each other once a year at another industry event or something, but we really didn't keep in touch beyond that. He would check in with me fairly frequently if I had something new. Most of the times, the directors I was working with already had their cinematographers that they wanted to work with, right? So, but I like this guy's work a lot. Cut to 4.5 years later, this guy ended up shooting 2 of my movies in the same year in 2 different countries. So just because we had connected on a creative level, we were able to find a project even down the road that both of us wanted to work together on. And the way it happened was I knew he was interested in the kind of films I was doing. So when my directors didn't have their own cinematographer, I was like, hey, why don't you consider this guy? Because if you like his work, I can make the introduction and we can take it from there. So it really did work out in that capacity. It's just that not every project, like even with the case with Simon and me, like that project didn't work out, in 2010. But now we've known each other for 10 years and we've made so many great connections and our friendship has evolved. And we continue to try to find something to work together on, but we still haven't found something, but I'm sure we will at some point.
Thank you, guys. That was a brilliant answer. And I'm going to actually tell you guys to take that to heart, no matter what position you're in, whether you're a DP or a director or whatever it may be. What Shri and Simon are talking about is so essential to filmmaking, to your art. The hustle is real, networking is real, but staying in touch, making authentic and genuine connections is so important because we can feel it. You're in the room with 1,000 people. Like Srihari said, he talked to this guy for an hour. He's going to remember him. He made a genuine connection, and that's, and Srihari and Simon's connection was genuine because they've kept in touch over 10 years. And it's such a big thing about just be yourself in the room and do the work. Okay, the next question Sumita has asked me to ask for her. It's for Srihari. What parts of yourself do you lend to the type of films you often create and the stories you are drawn to telling? That can be for both of you, actually.
For me, it kind of depends on at what level I get involved in the project. So if I'm the lead producer on it, then I'm fully involved from literally the story ideation process through the scripting process through the marketing and distribution of the film. But I do come on board certain projects as a co-producer, as an EP, then that is to fill a certain gap that the filmmakers and the producers already have. And then I try to devote my time and energy just specifically for that to enhance the project in whatever way I can. But just in terms of picking the project as well, I think something that Simon touched upon is the emotional connection to the material is very important for me in the independent film space, where you're pretty much earning less than minimum wage for your entire career. You have to enjoy doing what you're doing, or feel like you're making some kind of difference, either it be on the emotional level or a human level or a social level, that it is mounting to something. And for me, that's quite important. So that's what kind of drives me to choose the kind of projects that I'm doing.
Wonderful. Simon, do you want to touch upon it?
Yeah, I can't ignore the fact that I'm an immigrant, and as a brown person looking in on a different world. I was raised in England and then moved here, so I'm stuck with being more formal and polite than my classmates or my friends with lighter skin have been. So I can't ignore that I'm drawn to subjects of the outsider. Someone who is facing adversity or challenging the status quo, even if it's artistically, the filmmaker trying to do new things and break through somehow. So if it's on the surface or if it's in the subtext, I find that I'm drawn to those kinds of underdog stories. And I think it comes from just being in the position of inherently being an underdog in the society. I'm always rooting for the little guy and the little girl. So that's something that I feel an affinity towards. And whether I'm writing music for that character or whether I'm championing that filmmaker's story, that's what really drives me, I think.
That's awesome. Next, Hamza, can you come on the camera and open your mic, please?
Hey, it's nice to see some old friends. Hey, Simon, thanks for doing this. My question is about COVID protocols. I'm in pre-production right now. Me and my wife, we're like writer, director, producing team. It's my feature debut. And by the way, Niraj, if you're a DP, we just email me. You're real. We're shooting the first couple of weeks of September, God willing. And we decided not to go we decided to go non-union because we didn't get all the money that we thought we would. And basically my question is around COVID protocols. We've got our own that we're building that we're very aligned with the SAG because we think they make sense. We can't do every 3 days. It just doesn't really make sense. We have like an on-site, like a nurse on call. But our protocol is basically based around everybody getting tested before. We rented a campus. Everybody's going to be locked in. Having everybody test before we arrive, testing everybody when they arrive so we can kind of verify it again. And then it's a 2-week shoot. Do we, do another test and the 2-day break after 6 days, or do you think the 2 tests will be enough? I'm not going to hold you liable. I'm just kind of wondering if you have your protocols before SAG came in that you might be able to share with indie filmmaker.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that we were looking at, it really kind of depends on if anyone on your team is going to be outward facing, meaning with the general public of where you're going to be filming. For instance, a prop master, an art director, or someone from the art department has to go run an errand to the nearest Lowe's. They are interacting with the outside. So the main thing you need to kind of look at is a zone system, which the white paper that came out from SAG and EG also had. In independent film space, almost 90% of your crew and cast is going to be in zone A, which means that they are going to be interacting with the actors and the rest of the team. Primarily your cinematographer, your sound mixer, your first AC, hair makeup person. A lot of these so you're going to have a pretty tight crew. So the only person sort of that goes into zone C, who is completely outward facing, is an accountant, if you end up having an accountant. But everyone else ends up being zone A and zone B. So you do want to create this kind of layer system with your cast and the crew, wherein anyone who's dealing with the outside world has to be relegated in zone B. They cannot pierce zone A and come into zone A, because then you're exposing everyone in your zone A to that outside entity. In terms of the testing, there are multiple tests available. The antibody test is not recommended by anyone. So I would highly recommend doing the PCR or the rapid antigen test. The rapid antigen test is kind of interesting. It depends on which lab and service you use, because the accuracy rates are quite different. I know in my research when I was working, the Sophia SARS antigen test was one of the better ones, which gives you a result in 15 minutes, but you have to find a lab that will help you do the service that fast. The PCR testing, there are a bunch of labs that are available. The risk that you run with PCR is that it might not catch a positive every time. And that's one of the reasons serialized testing is recommended, where you test people regularly. So if you do the testing 2 weeks before you start shooting, and let's say a day before you start shooting, if you can get the results in 2 days' time, then it makes sense. But if you're not getting the results for 5 to 7 days, business days, so that could be a week or 10 days, it really defeats the purpose of you guaranteeing that no one in your cast or crew has COVID, unless you're isolating them, quarantining them for 2 weeks, an entire 2-week period before your first day of production. So that's the risk that as independent producers that you're running, is that it's very hard to keep, just because the testing is so delayed right now. What we had done was we were going to test people 2 weeks before they start prep, the day they start prep, and a few days before start of principal photography. And then the next thing is, if you are in fact quarantining everyone and there's no outward exposure, then you could do 2 times a week testing, which safeguards you against not catching the virus the first time. But with SAG's protocol, you have to do the 3 times. They are not budging on that. So if you have any SAG actors, you would need to do the 3 times a week testing. If you have non-SAG actors, then it's really up to you how you want to do it. But I think anything less than 2 times a week is not safe.
Thank you, Srihari. I actually put up, I think I put up the white paper as well as the original. There were two different documents. The other one was the industry-wide labor management safety committee task force. And I put up also the Safe Way Forward, which was the DGA, SAG, and everything else. So if you guys want to read it, please feel free. It's in the chat. Rohini, we have 2 more questions, guys. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. Thank you. Rohini, please turn on your camera and your mic. Rohini, there you are.
Hi, I'm unable to turn on my video.
That's okay.
I got it. Perfect. Thank you.
There we go.
Thank you guys for doing this. I think my question was very similar to Neeraj's question, which was, as producers, are you both very often responsible for bringing on board other creatives onto your project? I speak from the art department. I work in art department as a production designer and art director, and so what was the best way to connect with you? I think you partly answered that question for Neeraj, but I wanted to add an extra line to that. And in projects like yours, Srihari, which are very international projects, how does it work differently? Because art department people are usually hired locally because it's much easier to work with locals in art departments. And how does that impact, for example, me networking with someone like you who's very likely to work internationally and sort of connect to possibly work with you internationally?
Yeah, I mean, typically on a couple of the films that I've done, the production designer can be someone who is non-local, but the art director almost always has to be local because they are the ones who know the vendors. They are the ones who know the set dresser and the leadman and the prop master, and they have the necessary connections to kind of make it happen locally. In terms of working internationally as a production designer, it's really budget related. So there have been times when, I mean, I'll just give you an example for the film that I just recently shot in India, Australia, and the US. We had a central production designer who never left Bangladesh. So we had an art director in every country, and the look was pre-decided so that they could execute the vision for each of those locations, because just the budget didn't allow for us to travel more than the director and the DP, and the DP actually didn't end up traveling anyway. So those kind of things would be fairly common in the independent space. But in terms of working with international cast and crew, a good way to look at is non-American productions that are filming in the US. That's a good way to meet people who are not part of your industry. I mean, for instance, I've done some consulting work for a Chinese film that was filming in the US, a couple of Indian films that were filming. So it broadened my network. I know a bunch of people in the art and camera departments who work as crew for international films that are shooting only a portion, maybe a week or 10 days of their schedule in New York or anywhere in the US. That way you get to really expand your network, whereby you're not part of the entire movie, but you're working on a small portion of the shoot.
Good. Thank you so much.
All right. Simon, anything to add?
No, I'd agree with that. I mean, I will. I'll share that what we found on slightly bigger films. I've noticed that we really did rely on the reps to source a lot of the talent, whether it was locally or centralized. And it really boiled down to those films or those that network or people that we had in common that were familiar. And it gave us a common language, gave us a shorthand with, oh, I know if you've worked with so-and-so, what their approach is, how exacting they can be, or how creative they can be. So a lot of times it was looking for the interconnects between us. And when someone would reach out to me, if they were to say, I worked on this film and that, and so that worked on that film as well. And so I think based on that connection, what they're like, and I was mentored by them, or I assisted them, or I supervised them. It could be anywhere in that hierarchy, and that gives you a certain degree of comfort and that shorthand. It's like, I remember in the startup days, I went up to a potential investor. He was giving a talk somewhere, and I went up in the after the Q&A, when there's always a crowd that goes up to the stage. So I went up and had my business card in hand. I handed my business card, and he said, "Oh, where are you from?" And I told him, and he said, "No, what school did you go to?" And I said, "NYU." "Oh, I went to NYU." "Okay, yeah, I'll grab a cup of coffee with you." He knew nothing about me. And that was the only connection point, but he was a very proud alumni of NYU. And that was that connection point of, "Okay, kid, I'll give you a break. I did well from there, and I'll give back." And that has benefited me. And so those kind of touchstones do help. They're not going to get you the job, but if they can start the conversation, then it's on you to provide the evidence and to convince the other person that you have the talent, that you have all the other resources that you need in order to take it further.
Last question is from Shruti. If you can open your mic and your camera, please. There you are, Shruti.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
Thank you for answering all the questions and for taking mine. Shrihari, like you, I was about to shoot a film this year, my first feature, and things have obviously gone haywire. My question to you is, it was to be an international production, was to be shooting in Delhi in June, and a larger shoot schedule in October in California. I have international star cast, signed contracts and LOIs, etc. It will have to be SAG-AFTRA because I do have union actors. So general advice, since we are looking to push it out to next year, my financing commitments also may or may not be on it next year. So what do you think? Should I renew my LOIs? Should I keep this package intact, or should I give up on that and restart whenever I have the means to do so?
It kind of really depends if your financing is attached to the actors that you have brought on board.
No,
if it is totally
not
independent, and
Yeah.
if you, are you the director or producer of the film?
I'm the writer-director.
Writer-director. So if you as the writer-director are not passionate about the talent playing the particular role that you have in mind, then if you're open to recasting, then it makes sense to release them, because that way you have the option of maybe attaching someone better down the road. But at the same time, you run the risk of not being committed to your actors. So when the time comes, they might not be committed to you. So it kind of goes both ways in that sense. But the main thing that I would be wary of is doing any pay or play deals, because you just don't know when this is all going to even out and that you'll be able to film internationally. I mean, right now, India is not even allowing American citizens to come. Or anyone to fly out of India.
Or Indian actors coming out.
Exactly. So just something to be wary of is that as long as you don't have any pay or play deals, you can just keep stringing the actors along. And then once you have your dates, if they're not available anymore, you can recast.
Okay.
At that point.
And
with
same
SAG,
with
would
all
be under
contracts?
the SAG Global Rule 1 contract.
Yeah.
So you just have to be aware that there are additional expenses that get associated with it.
Thank you so
Very
much,
aware.
Shruti.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. We're going to wrap up. Before I wrap up, I would be remiss if I do not mention that August 31st, the lovely Ammi is hosting the casting director, Kim Graham. So do not miss that. This week on Sawi and Sai, we have 2 events. Tomorrow we have Kiran Subramaniam, who is going to talk about writing. She is going to talk about the development process. She's going to also talk about what the hustle is all about. She is a writer who's going to walk you through that whole situation. And then on Friday, we have Mayank, who's going to talk about being on the other side of the casting table. So for all of you actors, it's a good one to understand what they're thinking when you're thinking what they're thinking. Also, guys, thank you so much to Shrihari and Simon. This was a brilliant conversation. You guys were so informative and so educational, so thank you. Can we give a big round of applause? You guys all have reaction buttons right here. Or you can unmute yourselves. Thank you so much. This was brilliant.
Thank you.